Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Angela Wilson. I'm working part-time with Christy Crutzing in the Office of Faculty Success, and so this is certainly supported by Christy, as well as John McDaniel from the College of Arts and Sciences and Bella John in the College of Engineering. Hopefully our other two panelists will be showing up shortly. We're probably still looking for a parking spot. But I will introduce our other panelists to you. And I'd like them to go ahead and after I introduce everyone, I'll give them each about a minute and a half to tell you a little bit about themselves as well. So first of all, I'll start on the end. At the end is Marco Nardelli. He's a distinguished research professor in the departments of physics as well as chemistry. And Marco has gotten some very enormous grants and millions of dollars of funding. And so he'll tell us a little bit about that today. Next to him is Jincheng, who's an associate professor in the Department of Materials Science and Engineering. And he's only an associate professor, and he's already brought in at least several $1 million, and probably goes up almost daily. So he's brought in quite a bit of money, and he's received UNT's early career award for research and creativity. Next to him is Bill Buckles, who is a professor in computer science and engineering. And Bill has also quite an incredible track record of funding, working on a lot of diverse teams. And so he'll tell us a little bit more about himself and his work shortly. And to my right is Niki, who is Associate Dean of PACS. Her area is sociology, and she's done a lot of work and gotten funding from a lot of different types of agencies, state agencies, national, international agencies, in a lot of interdisciplinary teams, not only in a research area, but then also forming all types of interesting interdisciplinary treatments. So I'll start with you, Marco. Why don't you tell me a little bit more about yourself?
Can I just time out?
Yeah.
And Angela's fair game also for asking questions about funding, so, in computational chemistry, so fire away.
So I'm going to ask a series of questions, and then all of you will have an opportunity to ask questions as well. And feel free to interject as we go through. Questions are more than welcome. I'm going to give everyone a little bit of a time limit for answering questions so that we can kind of hit upon a lot of topics, and we can revisit any topics you want to touch upon again. So Marco.
Okay, so my area of research is computational material science, basically in physics. We work a lot in the development of databases of materials properties for material development and discovery. Right now, my funding comes almost exclusively from the Department of Defense Office of Naval Research. And we have in URI, that is $8.5 million in 5 PIs that are between UNT, Duke, Central Michigan, up to 5 universities, Maryland. And from the same Office of Naval Research, we also have 2 side grants that are 2 investigators, basically, for developing specific areas within the big grant, the big umbrella grant that we got. That's the status right now.
Yeah.
Hi everybody. I joined UNT in 2007 as a assistant professor. So I did grow in this institution to where I am right now. My research area is kind of related to what Marco was saying, computational material science. And I also did a little bit on the experimental side of inorganic, especially glass materials. So my research funding mainly comes from National Science Foundation. So in the past few years, we got 4 or 5 grants awarded, and we're currently still 3 going on, with 1 going proposal, which is industrial interaction. So in addition, I have a DOE grant from the Deep Science Division. So this was awarded last year. And so I also have a little bit direct funding from industry from the Semiconductor Research Corporation. So kind of tapping into each possible area. I think gradually we'll see to currently working on a DOE proposal, including as well as Sam is here. And, okay. And so, which is, if successful, would be like a 10 million center kind of proposal.
Bill Buckles, I'm from Computer Science and Engineering. I'm going to give a little bit of a different kind of introduction because I actually studied for this panel. I looked at my resume and drew some conclusions, and then I interviewed another senior faculty member about her experiences to see if they coincided with mine. The main conclusion that I reached was program managers and dealing with them. But in terms of funding agencies, there have had a number of instances of different state, local, and national. My own graduate study was supported by the Missile Defense Agency, so that's been a factor in my research life since then. NSF is probably second, and then after that is state agencies such as NHARP and TARP and similar agencies in other states in which I've taught. Next is probably Department of Transportation at the state level, and various companies plus the Air Force Office of Science.
And let me, Nikki, I'll come to you in a minute, but let
That's
me go
fine.
ahead and introduce our other panelists. So, to my far right here is Yang Tao, and Yang Tao is Chair of Mechanical and Engineering. He's Director of the PACCAR Technology Institute, and he's Director of the Zero Energy Research Lab, and he's also gotten a phenomenal amount of money through the years. Also to my right here is Rick Nader. He's the Director of Research Development in UNT's Research Office. Well, he has been. Right now, he's Vice Provost. I was getting
Provost.
Vice Provost of International Affairs. There we go.
Do I get to create a new title?
And Rick has done a lot of work working in the research office through the years. He knows a lot about international collaborations, international funding opportunities. He's hosted a wonderful international funding agency conference here at UNT. I think it's the first one that's been held ever at the university, so it was a great program. And he's also been the program officer at NSF for the international division. So he comes with an incredible amount of insight today. So it's great to have him here as well. So I'm having everyone introduce a little bit about themselves, 90 seconds worth. So Young, if you'd like to add in a little bit more than what I've told. Yes.
Okay, Yang Tao, Mechanical Energy Engineering, background in heat transfer, which is part of thermofluid sciences, engineering, under the mechanical and energy engineering umbrella. In the last 25, maybe 26, 27 years, academic world in the United States. I've been in 4 different universities with different focus on research, so all the way from education, fundamental to applications. My latest efforts is more in the multidisciplinary area related to building and energy, in broad term. And we have folks in, of course, engineering, mechanical, electrical, construction, architecture. We also have team members from computer science and social science and psychology. So, looking forward to opportunity to bring more people on the team, and we'll be glad to share some of my insights, but also want to learn from you.
Okay, Rick Nader, I was a program officer at NSF's International Office for 3 years. They offered me to stay, and I didn't. and now the real work begins. And that's my dream for NSF, rather for UNT, is to become a globally engaged research university. I think Mike Pro already got that one for Arizona State. But, you know, that's where the future lies, is in the nature of research is global. The things that the university can do to make it easier for faculty to go global with their work will be a huge shot in the arm for any institution, and I think UNT is still on track to go to Tier 1. And I don't see anybody leaving the Tier 1 area, so the only place to kind of really grow it is through global thinking. And so that's kind of how and I was talking to Brad Fenwick, who's from Elsevier, and if you don't know him, you got to get to know him. He's really an inspiration. He's a great consult. He's been through the trenches in many ways, through the research office and at several places. And the one piece of advice before your questions, if you're going to be one of the 7 dwarfs, don't be bashful. Because faculty that get grants are not necessarily bashful. They're good, they're solid. But don't be afraid to kind of seek the help you need. Try and try again. Persistence pays off.
Niki.
I'm Niki Dash. I'm the Associate Dean in the College of Public Affairs and Community Service, but a faculty member in CAS in sociology. I do disaster research and have been doing disaster research since 1992. When Hurricane Andrew hit Miami 2 weeks before I started my master's program, I got my first NSF grant to study a hurricane as a graduate student, and most recently received a $300,000 NSF grant with Gary Webb in Public Administration to study disaster preparedness among Native American communities. So clearly I'm the social scientist on the panel, and our funding levels are shockingly low.
Thank you for being here.
Yes, it's shockingly low compared to the hard sciences. So
We'll fix that this year.
yeah, we'll see, right?
Yeah.
So it's definitely a different perspective, but an important one.
So before we go any further, because I'd really like the panel to be able to target comments if possible, if we could go around the room and just, introduce yourself and tell us what department you're in, that would be terrific.
My name is Tao Zhao. I'm from kinesiology, health promotion and recreation.
Kitty King, Department of Political Science.
Kyle Horn, Chemical and Energy Engineering. Samuel Tenney, I'm an assistant professor in chemistry, and I just started this year.
Dale McDaniel, I'm a physics professor and associate dean for research in the College of Arts and Sciences.
I'm Jordan Frith. I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Technical Communication.
Christy Kretzinger, and I'm interim vice provost for academic affairs. That's the first time I've said that. I think I said it right.
Hi, I'm Sandeep Mukherjee, material science and engineering.
Giselle Greenwich, sociology.
Daniel Adamne, library. I also teach in College of Information.
Kat Aoyama, I'm an engineering sciences and PAPS.
Christine Basson, College of Arts and Sciences. I do not teach.
Amanda White Bennett, I'm with UNT International.
I'm Brad Fenwick. My title is Senior Vice President of Global Strategic Alliances at Elsevier. My academic disciplines are professorships in infectious diseases.
I'm Tino Reiner from Physics Department and assistant professor.
And this is Sean Adams, who works with me in the Center for Advanced Scientific Food and Botany, who's our film producer tonight. And Joanna Hussey, who works with Christy Kretzinger. So thank you both for volunteer on today. So now, as I mentioned earlier, we're going to go ahead and go through a series of questions, and all of you feel free to interject if you have questions or points that you would like to add. And certainly, Brad, in the back, I know you have a wonderful global perspective. I'm actually an editor for Elsevier, so nice to meet you. But feel free to contribute as well. We would welcome that. I'd like to go through, and we're going to have 60, we'll start off with 60-second limit, and when it says stop, please. And I'm not going to ask all of you the same question. We'll try to, since there's 6 of you, we'll find out from the agenda, but if you really feel like this is a question you must answer, just wave at me or something. So I'm going to start with Jincheng. Okay. Jincheng, there are so many grant opportunities available. How do you pick the right one? How do you decide which way to go? Especially as when you were an assistant professor, you remember that more fondly probably than the rest of us, and more recently. So.
Yeah. So seems that is not that far away, a few years back. So I think I still remember when I was applying for the first NSF grant, and I think the first project I chose was an idea I developed when I was a PhD student and I was a postdoc. Since I was not independent, I could not develop the idea. So I think it's something like my hobby, my interest. I fully developed that into a proposal. And so I sent it to NSF. I was very lucky, I would say, well, just like a reward. I was funded in the first try, so in my second year. So that was
Jincheng is also very good. But I mean, you go after many different opportunities, and the type of work you do is applicable in so many different areas. So kind of beyond that first grant, how do you kind of sort through the agencies, the opportunities?
So just probably like many of the fresh assistant professors, you don't know the terrain, you don't know what's going on. Just NSF seems to be up to the front, you can get to know first, but I definitely have tried many other opportunities as well. And but since at academic institutions, NSF is very highly recognized. I think that's a starting point for me.
I don't know if anyone else would like to add on to that one.
Oh, I have a more cynical perspective on this. I usually go for the goals where I know who's participating, I know the teams, and I go after the teams. Or maybe the teams go after me in a way. So it's actually not because I get the email that says, oh, there is this solicitation, blah, blah, blah. It's because somebody tells me that there is a solicitation we should look at, and then we, as a team, look at the solicitation, and if we know the people involved, then we talk with the people that are involved, and everything kind of moves like that. It's a few years that I don't even apply to NSF anymore, I have to say, because it's a lot of work for very little reward.
And it's small money for you.
It is small money.
He's been on an $8.5
But anyway, I think that,
grant, so.
if I have to say something, most important thing is knowing somebody.
And that was kind of my next question in terms of, okay, you found an opportunity that you want to apply for. What do you do? How far out? Do you contact a program officer? Do you contact a program officer? Rick, I'll let you start off with this one.
Oh, okay, so just to tag on the last comment, it's not know somebody in the sense of, come on, you'll give me the money anyway, but it's know what their priorities are. Know the agencies. Think of that RFP as a treasure map, the request for proposal. If you don't know what RFP means, you're already behind me. Okay, but that's your guide, okay? And the agencies will look for new ideas all the time. So as a researcher, and I've not done this, but I've substituted for people and reflected for PIs who've gone through the stop process. So I actually would recommend the process of saying, if high school dropouts is the problem, and your research is on substance abuse areas, then you tie your research to substance abuse as a possible cause for high school dropouts, and then you go from there. You have to define the need strategically, right? So think about your research area applied in multiple ways. Stop.
Anyone want to add on to that?
I would.
Okay.
I really endorse wholeheartedly what Nick said, because as I say, I studied up this panel. And I looked at my resume and I counted the number of grants that I did not know the program officer in advance. And it was about 1/3, and I checked this with my colleague, it was about 1/3 of the grants. And of the grants, of that 1/3, they were often things like NHARP, or TARP, or other state agencies in which it was impossible to know in advance the program officer. So in reality, more than 2/3 where it was possible to know the program officer in advance, I knew the program officer in advance.
Anyone else want to add on?
If I may, I believe this is a very good comment. I like to comment on my experience. And when I first got assistant professor, I just pick anywhere, any programs anything, and I just submitted my idea without knowing what their priority. And I almost get nothing in this. And career awards, which is quite a bit without talking to the program manager. And so I think that's probably something we want to avoid, is that here's my idea, and you need to give money to me, and never think that way. And, but however, I want to echo that you do have to have your idea. So these two are hand to hand, so you have to make sure that you are someone that's standing out in a particular area, so that when people do need that, they will think about you. But in the meantime, how do you have a brilliant idea but not fundable? How do you know that you get funded? Stop it. Well, that is that you need to reach out and understand that part, what they do.
And I mean, I think getting to know program officers is so absolutely critical. And there's different ways you can do it. I mean, one thing that I had done was, you can talk to the research office if you're not getting calls to be on any types of panels. Contact the research office. Talk to Del McDaniel. Talk to those of you in college. Talk to your associate dean for research in your different colleges. Talk to the research office, and they can help kind of facilitate you. They can talk to people at the different agencies, different foundations, and try to get you on some of these panels. Whenever I get on an NSF panel, especially when I was assistant professor, I would start looking through the RFPs to see what else was out there in terms of what funding opportunities were available. And I try to drum up a few ideas on each one, make sure I read the RFP, because program officers don't like questions about things that are already in the RFP. They don't have a lot of time. And I would just kind of go around, whenever we had a break during the panel, I would go around, knock on the door of each of the program officers. I had them all scouted out. I'd knock on the door and say, do you have a couple minutes? I have a couple questions. So I would go through and start getting to know the program officers that way and find out about, okay, will my idea kind of match with what they're looking for or not? And so it was a great way to kind of scout out, I mean, it wasn't going to write all those proposals then, but kind of scout out some opportunities for the future, and I think it's really paid off. Yeah, Del.
Angela, if I could add on your comment, what I tried to do every time I go to Washington for anything, I used to go for federal demonstration partnership meetings 3 times a year. I go for other reasons. I'd always go for an extra 2 days, just stay 2 extra days, spend about a day in NSF and then another day going to some of the other agencies that have given me money, ONR and DARPA and even DOE. We've gone to DOE before, both their offices. And I try to go to everybody that's ever given me money. And I see them every time I go to Washington if they're in the office. I just go by and shake their hand, ask them how their horses are doing, or whatever. And some of them have horses and they live away from Washington. They live down in Virginia. And they tell me about their horses. They show me pictures of their horses like they would grandchildren. I mean, it's just the funniest thing you've ever seen. And so you become friends with them if you can. And that helps you. What they will do then is they will immediately think of you if they have a panel coming up. And then you get to come and be in Washington again. And you get to see people again. So every time you go there, you go to where any agency is, you try to go and talk to the people, as Angela mentioned. If you don't know them, and then the people you do know, go back and talk to them again and just say hi. They'll be happy to talk to you for a minute or two, and it's always worked.
It's a great way to find out how many friends you have once you leave Washington.
Right.
And I tell new faculty all the time, the single most important thing for me to be successful was getting on review panels. And I don't think we can undersell that to you at all, because once you're on a review panel, you see what's fundable. And so you have that epiphany of, oh, that's why that never got funded. And so being on review panels, to me, especially when you're an assistant professor and just starting to submit, is probably some of the most important work you can do. It's a ton of work, but it gives you an insight into the process that you can't have unless you're at that level and see what's fundable in your discipline and what they're looking for in proposals.
And I think this nurturing of relationships is so important on so many things. I mean, even if if you're an area where you don't necessarily have a lot of federal support, this is a great way to make relationships with companies, with other folks. I mean, I had a company contact me and say, hey, we're interested in your work. And I thought, well, nothing has really happened over the past 6-7 months. And so I said, well, how about if I come up there? And so, you know, I paid for part of the trip, they paid for part of it. But now, I mean, it's a company, it's a huge chemical company, and they've never had any type of relationship with UNT, and they'll only deal with certain universities, but now they're going to try to start dealing with UNT. And so sometimes it takes kind of actually visiting them on site, going ahead, spending a little bit of money to try to, have that conversation happen a little further. So, anything else to add?
I mean, on the specific issue of the program manager, no. On the issue of knowing somebody, yes.
Okay, that works.
Because it's not just the program manager that is important. I mean, if you look at the situation right now, the rate of success of proposals at NSF is like 3%, what, 2.5? I mean, it's ridiculous. So often by yourself, you don't go anywhere. Even if you are the best, you might not go anywhere. Panels can give you conflicting results, reviews on your proposal. So it's not even helpful to get the reviews back, because then you correct for what the panel says, and then you send it, and another panel says the opposite. So there is a lot of chance, and anyway, very low success rate. You have to know your colleagues, and you have to form a partnership where you can play a part, even small part, in a larger group of PIs, and go for funding that is directed to larger initiatives. Because I think that you have more chances in that way than by going as a single investigator. At least this is in our field. I don't send single investigator grants since, I don't know, 5, 6 years, 10 years. I don't know.
The whole research landscape has gone from single investigator to multi-investigator to interinstitutional to global. Okay, so that's the world you're in now. So you can't immediately think, I'm going to work with Nikki and I'm going to work with Bill. Okay, or maybe you will, but if you want to have impact, if you want to have diversity of thought processes and ideas, I mean, that's what research and discovery is all about. So, and the good news about NSF, despite you have to cut your teeth somewhere, okay, and it's a good place to start. Is that the only thing that correlates with success at NSF is number of previous attempts. It's not the star power of you or your institution or your publication. If you can keep that in mind, you should be enthusiastic okay, to try. Because 2.3 is the magic number. Jincheng knocked out the statistic a little bit. I think, that's just got to keep trying.
And that is so critical with these different agencies, like Rick said. It was funny, a number of years ago, there was a proposal I'd submitted 3 times, and I went in and talked to the program officer, and she said, well, some universities, some places are taking 4, 5, 6, 7 times. And I said, terrific. I said, I'm going to keep bothering you, and I'm going to keep visiting you every single year till I get it. And I got funded that year. So I think that was amazing.
The threat works.
Persistence. So, and this is a question for I think for all of you. So, and I think it's an important one, because I remember as an assistant professor, I would be frantically jumping around from one proposal to the next proposal to the next proposal, and I just, never was, I think, the proposal necessarily good enough. I tried to do so many different things. How far in advance of a proposal due date do you start writing a proposal?
24 hours. Well, maybe I can start. I do have someone told me they actually, indeed, 24 hours and paid in and got funded. That is not because of they have money, because it's well targeted. It's not because they start right or they already prepared for a long time in terms of the basic substance. And this happened to be opportunity, which maybe because it's getting a call from program manager, and they know, and this particular for this type of institution. So the competition is a little bit narrow. But I like to go back to in a broad way. Broad sense is the assistant professor, because don't forget that we just started. I haven't written many of those. Some of the comments we had is based on we have been many years. Right? So I would suggest that first you have to find a way to brand yourself. You have to have your own stuff first. And so in that sense, throw more proposals, not bad idea. Give you exercise. Put your thoughts together. Who are you? Who are you? And then it break, because when you meet with program manager, you still have to describe yourself. That's so important. And I also echo Marco said, you have to be visible in your community. You'll be a session chair, you organize conference, you constantly have your antennas, not sense those funding agencies, but also work at funding. Make a good friend of them as well. And then you become the team members very easily when they talk about it.
And that is so critical to be going to the conferences and all that, because those people are going to be the ones who are reviewing your proposals, they're on the panels, and so it is so helpful again if they know you, if they've seen you present, and it makes a world of difference.
So there you have to be sure that you go to the right conference hall.
And give a good presentation.
Because going to, from our perspective, we go to the big conferences because we are sure that we meet everybody, but we don't meet the people that we want to meet in the sessions. We meet them in the corridors. So
Exactly.
when you start, you have to go in the conference where you are sure that you can be seen, because if you go to a conference with 7,000 people, forget it, you will not be seen by anybody. Going to your question, maybe not 24 hours, but the advantage of starting and writing a lot of proposals is that they develop a lot of materials that then you can put together in 24 hours. Because fortunately, we have cut and paste. Now, of course, you have to write something that makes sense in English and in your discipline, but the more you write, the more you can, get out and reuse at the first occasion.
But actually, Nick, I'll come to you in a minute. But I want to follow up on that because, some of us never, now I find proposals to be pretty easy to write. But when I was first starting, it was just like this month of torture. I could just lock myself in a room. I would just, there'd be line walks, everything else, and it was kind of a torturous process. So I can assure you, if you're feeling that, it does get better with time. So just try to work through that, and we'll come back and talk about ways to work through that in a minute. But
Well, I was going to say, it also depends on your discipline. I have never answered an RFP. Most of my proposals that I submit are ideas that I develop sometimes months in advance and look for the right opportunity to submit it to. I submit to NSF, not in sociology. I actually submit to NSF in engineering. And you have to know those tricks. There's a tiny little area in engineering that funds disaster research, and they fund social science disaster research. If you don't know that, you're applying to the wrong
division or
thank you,
program.
wrong division.
Yeah.
It will eventually get to Dennis Wenger, who's the current disaster person, but it's going to take a very long path, and it's going to get reviewed by people who have no idea what disaster research is. So you have to figure out what the path is in your discipline, and it's very different in social sciences than it is in chemistry and physics and some of those others.
I want to change a little bit up here. So I'm going to start with Bill. So Bill, what are common pitfalls in proposal writing, and how do you overcome them?
I think that the two problems are the introduction and the bibliography, the background. I think if you don't do a good job on those, then it exposes or you are inferred to be less than up on the topics that you're writing. So I generally write the introduction in about 6 paragraphs. I have a rather I don't follow it exactly every time, but the first paragraph I like to think of as an upside down triangle that starts out with a whole area, 40 million cancer cases in the U.S. every 5 years, and narrow it down to, I'm going to combine 2 sensory data sets to detect breast cancer earlier, move the needle to the left. So big, the whole world, shrink it down. Then state of the art, what does a state of the art consist of right now? challenges, why isn't the state of the art moving further to the right, methods, and then significance of the research. And I followed that model with a few references in between, and then the bibliography. Do I have time? I think the three things about bibliography is that when I read a paper or a proposal, it seems as if someone has stacked papers. They read one, wrote what it was, read the second, wrote what it was. Three things is, one is to create a taxonomy and group the papers and make the taxonomy evident. Two, use a uniform terminology and symbology. Don't just borrow the terminology from the papers that you read. Make it your terminology, the terminology you want to use in your methods. And then third, cover the most relevant paper, most important, cover the most relevant papers to your research last, and indicate why they need, where the improvement is needed, where their shortcomings. And do it carefully too, because the author of that paper may be on the review panel, or worse yet, the student of the author may be on your review panel. So state shortcomings very carefully.
And actually following that up, in terms of the bibliography, you can try to strategize in terms of who you'd like to have. Yes, with many agencies, you can request your potential reviewers. You can't with all agencies and all foundations, all funding agencies, but with many you can. And another way, if you want to try to add some more names to the list, because you don't want to list 20 people to include, is to strategically put those references to those people within your bibliography, because NSF program officers often look at your bibliography to say, oh, who are they citing quite a bit, and then they may use that as potential reviewers. And actually, Rick, I'm going to follow up with you on the same question. So, from the other side of the fence, what do you see in terms of common pitfalls in proposal writing?
Following directions. Page limits, font size. I mean, if you can't do that, then don't bother. But I think the title and the abstract of the project summary are the two most important that set you up for success, or they set you up for failure. If you have a title that's clever enough but not cheesy to point the reviewer in the direction you're going, and then state why it's important, what you're really doing, what you think the merit is compared to the little bit of literature you're going to sprinkle in there to give them the sense of who you are and what world are you in terms of academia and research. And then that broader impact statement catches a lot of people off guard. What does a broader impact mean? So 15 seconds I can tell you. It's a lot of things. But
you can take more than that, because that was actually another question.
Okay.
So.
Well, luckily NSF has a list on their website in, I think it was 07 they came out with it, or 97. When Rita Colwell came up with broader impacts, it was very smart. It was for Congress probably, but it also helped scientists and engineers think more broadly about why what they do is important, and it helps, I think, the whole review process of kind of, well, if that's going to change some small part of the world beyond that incremental science, what's that change? And I think that's often where you can be very, very effective, because you probably know that better than anyone in your research area, how you're going to change that world. And so I would say that broader impacts are something, and Brad, please, I cede my 30 seconds to you.
So this is one that's a bit of a pet peeve of mine, so I'll be very honest with you. So I've had the luxury of the curse of sitting on study sections and review panels across all the science agencies. And as a chief scientist, actually observing those without actually being on the panel. And it's actually quite amazing to me that you get 3 or 4 reviewers that will find the same flaw in the grant. So the flaw was obvious to anybody that wasn't too close to the grant to read over it or ignore it. So it's so obvious that 2 or 3 or 4, everybody on the panel says this is a weakness in this proposal. You need to know that weakness before you submit. The most difficult challenge for young faculty are to let somebody else read your proposal before you submit it. So define those flaws so you can fix them ahead of time, or recognize the flaw, disclose the flaw, and provide a solution to the weakness, which is actually a very clever way of getting grants. We recognize this is a weakness, here's how we're going to address it, and here's why that'll be successful. It's very interesting when you write a paper and you submit it, you're more than happy to share it with your colleagues and let them review the paper before you submit it to a journal. Research grants are very much more personal. But you have to break away from that and share it with your senior colleagues and say, tell me what's wrong with this proposal. And then you have to tell them, don't be bashful about telling me honestly what's wrong with this. Because they'll generally not want to be too harsh with their junior colleagues. They're not doing a favor if they don't tell you what's wrong or spend the time to do that. Because at the end, if you win the grant, everybody's happy. You know, your mentor's happy, the person that helped review the grant's happy, you're happy, and your odds of success go up dramatically if your proposal is internally reviewed. So it comes back to your other question. If you're starting this process, you need to write the grant in enough time to let it go through an internal review process before you submit it. When you become a skilled writer, you don't need your colleagues so much to write a competitive proposal. But when you're starting, I still give my colleagues my grants. I'm not doing it. And I go, I didn't see that. That is a problem. Thank you for pointing that out. I'm going to fix that. Or I don't understand this grant at all. Well, I better not submit it because my reputation's on the line. When you submit a bunch of poor grants, you build a reputation with the community very quickly of somebody that is just throwing trash into, and you're wasting my time. You can't afford to do that either. So my suggestion, the biggest flaw in terms of writing grants is not doing it soon enough and not having colleagues review those before they're submitted.
Talking as someone who reviews a lot of interdisciplinary grants, because hazards research is mostly interdisciplinary, one of my biggest pet peeves as a reviewer are either social scientists who try to do engineering without an engineer, or an engineer who tries to do social science without a social scientist. And that happens so often when you're especially responding to RFPs focused on social problems, for example, that are sort of grounded in social science. You're sort of bringing an engineering solution, but there's a major social science component, and you're now going to be the social science expert. You know, evacuation from hurricanes, for example, can be a transportation engineering solution, but you only can figure out that solution if you understand what people are going to do. You need to have a social scientist on these interdisciplinary proposals that are doing interdisciplinary work, and I've never seen one of those be successful when engineers try to do it on their own or social scientists try to do the other side on their own. You've got to build those interdisciplinary collaborative teams.
So Jincheng, same question. So what are common pitfalls in proposal writing, and how do you overcome them? Or you don't have any?
There are many, right away.
Too many of them, yeah. I was thinking maybe to share just a few. I think many times when we write a proposal, we do not have in addition to the bibliography, the review of the proposal, the literature, and also what preliminary results we have obtained. And so without enough amount of work, and the proposal you're proposing might not make sense or will not lead to the right direction. So that's one thing I've been thinking is if you can put together a very concise a part of preliminary results, that will definitely point you propose research in that direction. And without that, it's kind of no foundation of what continue forward.
Write it in English.
And if you have
As a reviewer, I get proposals that don't make sense, period. Be hyper meticulous. Check if you are repeating the same words twice, if your sentence has a subject, a verb, and an object, and
And a period.
really, I think the proposal, like papers, you have to tell a story. If you don't tell, if your story stays behind, you don't get anywhere. And this is something I say to my students when they give presentation, to whoever writes papers, my postdocs that write the papers. I mean, you have to have your audience in mind and do in a way that you can be understood.
And you don't get any brownie points for being brief. So if you're allowed to have 15 pages and you're done in 10, the odds are you've missed something major. Because 15 pages they've come up with for a reason. And you're either underspecifying your methods, you're not giving a good literature review to show that you know the discipline. Your first indication that you have a problem is if your proposal is horribly short. Because you've obviously missed something in the process.
Yeah, I mean, if you have 15 pages, take 15 pages. Otherwise, people are gonna say, well, you left out this, and of course you had the room. You had the room to address it. I recently got an NSF lunch review, and it was 5 pages. I knew right then it was not gonna get funded. It was gonna be an easy review. So.
A lot of times, a lot of the proposals I review, too much is proposed. And authors think that when you propose a lot, then it's gonna look better to the reviewers, but the reviewers pick it up just like that, because they do this all the time. They look at the proposal and they say, there's no way in the world they can do this in 3 years. This group cannot do it in 3 years. They've got 5 years worth of work here. So that a lot of times provides a bad review for a proposal if you propose too much.
Too ambitious.
Too ambitious. So really think about that, and that's the reason for having your colleagues look at it, for them to give you some feedback and tell you, hey, this is ridiculous. You can't do this. So think about that when you're writing proposals.
Well, we're thinking of proposals generically, but that federal government and state and federal, that's a different kind of proposal than corporate proposal. You better keep it to. and they'll give you the benefit of the doubt in other ways. You don't have to demonstrate it, right? So it's a different relationship. So don't take just 15 as a gospel. I mean, it depends on who you're targeting.
Depends on what the RFP says too.
Right.
Yeah, can I just interject, because these are all really great points and very helpful. And I think one of the things is that depending on your department, you have a different culture toward grant writing. And
Correct.
so I love hearing you guys say reach out to your colleagues, except we've not ever had a culture of grant writing. In fact, for a long time, departmental evaluations, we were specifically told, don't write grants. They don't pay off. If you're going to be an assistant going to associate, it's not working. Well, it's a new day now. I mean, the world has changed. So what kind of UNT resources do we have for helping like grant writing workshops and shepherding it through? And trust me, there's already like 3 of you I'm already targeting, so don't leave. But what kind of UNT resources do we have for getting that kind of feedback, in addition to networking in the discipline? Because I think that's one of the big things that I will start doing right away, is reaching out to my colleagues where the culture at their university is very much focused on grants.
Del, I'm gonna let you.
I'm happy to answer that too.
And yeah, Del.
Not a lot.
We have people that will help you. We have people that will help you find sources of funding as well as help you prepare the proposal. And the research office will also provide this. But first, probably go to the college that you're in, our college.
Yep.
And
I'm on your calendar. Get ready.
come see us, and we'll help you.
But there's resources at some colleges, at the college level, for the sort of mechanics of a proposal. But we actually don't have, in my opinion, as someone, I haven't been associate that long, I don't think we have a lot of good resources to find people who can assist. Because your best bet is to find someone, specifically for you, any social scientist who has been on a review panel can read your proposal and probably find the holes in that proposal. I am comfortable enough reading just about any NSF proposal. I can't necessarily tell you about the science, but I can tell you what a reviewer is going to see missing right away. And particularly on social science proposals, I review for NSF at least once a year. I mean, I know what's a fundable proposal, what a solid, broader impacts is right now. And I don't think there are any resources right now that there's at UNT where there's a list of faculty.
That's what I was just about, my follow-up question
It doesn't
is,
exist.
well, could we work on perhaps in CAS or sort of targeting toward that as we move toward it, for getting a list of folks? Because it should be on annual evaluations, because it does count. I mean, the ironic thing about our department and not having that culture is that we have people who review grants, even though we don't have that culture. Over time, that sort of subsided, but having people across, especially for interdisciplinary work, it would be tremendously helpful. To have a list of names, almost like a research mentor.
But I mean, you have to figure it out right now on your own.
Well, actually, you don't have to figure it out on your own, necessarily.
Not totally on your own.
Well, no, because, and actually, I mean, you know, Christy Cutler's office, I mean, one thing that's been done in the Office of Faculty Success is those mentoring grants, and some of them are basically for individual faculty. And so there's been a number of individual faculty that have requested these because they don't really feel like they're in an area where there's been a lot of people out in funding in their areas. So they've identified someone externally that they could try to talk with. They've asked for a little bit of money towards providing them like an honorarium or whatever for a consulting fee for providing them with advice. They read their proposals. Some of them are working together on developing proposals together in areas that often we don't really necessarily see funded at UT. And so I think there's been some good success on this.
I got to put a plug in for Amanda now because research development sort of doesn't exist at the research office any longer. It's just an international. And so why stop at the federal level? Let's find something good wherever it might be in the world. And there's a lot of places out there. Horizon 2020, you can be involved in things. So we have that capability to find you things, mentor you in terms of the type of things Nick's talking about is, you know, does it hold together? Is it sharp enough to cut through the review panel? And Phil Paulino is an NSF rotator.
Right.
And so I mean, there's a lot of people on campus that can help, and I think if you just reach out to them, they will be happy to help, and hopefully they'll be happy to help. If they don't help, then find somebody.
You have to remember that you may spend 40 hours writing your proposal. The reviewers will spend 2 hours reading and writing a review. And so how you catch their attention, make sure, and I agree with your point very well in terms of if you don't dot the I's, cross the T's, it says, well, this is a sloppy scientist, I'm not going to function. You don't have complete sentences. How can they trust you to follow through?
They're looking for good ideas, but they're looking for the ability to do it. And if they have confidence in you as a researcher, it will show through in the way you handle your proposal.
And we have proposal writing courses that are taught for graduate students, and I teach them every fall. And we don't really have that for faculty. They just have to sort of get one-on-one help from their colleagues or from their college. But the graduate students and many graduate students from chemistry, physics, biology, political science, English, business, I mean, there's a whole range of students that have taken this course over the years. And that's, you can actually do an NSF or an NIH proposal, whichever one you want. That's mainly what the course is about.
My observation like that is just tone. So as a graduate student postdoc, and early on you were writing your thesis, writing papers. Those papers are written in a passive tone. When you write a grant, you write it in active tone. Making that switch is not an easy thing to do. You learn how to be promotional, but not too promotional. Right?
Not arrogant.
Be persuasive. Trying to be too promotional in a paper, you get rejected.
As an academic, you're leaning back, and you're leaning forward in a proposal, right, in terms of your presentation.
So I'm going to ask another question because all of us have gotten many grant proposals rejected. And so a question is, how do you handle negative reviews? And what do you do if you don't agree with the reviews? Mark, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I'll start because I apologize, but in fact we'll leave very shortly. It depends, because as I said before, sometimes you get conflicting reviews anyways, one time and the second time. So sometimes you immediately realize that the comments are pertinent to the proposal, as if the colleague of yours was reading your proposal and said, oh, this is nice, and so you realize that it's wrong. If you think that the reviewer is not informed enough to give you a fair judgment, then stay with your judgment. With this, I will also add that Angela says we have to submit the same proposal 6 times before you get funded. You might submit it for 6 times and not get funded anyways. If what you are proposing is not of any interest of the agency that you are trying to get the money from.
Right.
So they might just say, well, your proposal, it's interesting, but it's not what we want.
Right.
And there are some agencies that are, much more targeting to particular areas like DARPA. You don't write a DARPA proposal if you don't really know exactly what they want, because that's what they want. And if you give them something that is 5 centimeters on the right, they say, no, we don't want this, we want that.
And some people choose in their proposal to actually address previous reviews and say, I've addressed X, Y, and Z, and on this other matter, I've decided that not to change it. The NSF, Gary and I just we got it on the second time. The first time, we thought some of the reviews were just completely off base, and we did not address it at all, and it worked with the panel that reviewed the second. It's very possible that we could have got some of the same folks from that first panel, and I've been on multiple panels where I do the same ones. So if you can add a section where you say, I've addressed this and this for previous reviews, and I think they were wrong, but say it nicely, you at least are addressing, if you get the same reviewers. And that to me is always the big
15 seconds before I leave. It depends also on the agency. For instance, if you send proposal to NIH, NIH keeps the panel. So if the panel says something the first time, you want to address all the things that they tell you, because the panel is going to be the same panel that you review it the second time.
Know your audience and how they deal with it.
Exactly.
Yeah, and actually following what Niki said, what I do in terms of NSF, because I've been on panels where you have so many different proposals to look at, it's just kind of overwhelming. And so you want to make sure, sometimes some program officers, if your proposal was really close the time before, kind of have a little bit of, they don't say, yes, you need to fund this one, but they kind of have a little bit of favoritism towards your proposal. I know they're not supposed to, but they remember it. And so I often try to put a preamble at the very start of my proposal. I put it in italics at the very start, talking about proposal was submitted last time. I say the proposal number, and I say what I've addressed very briefly in that. So they know this is coming in again, it was close last time, and this is what's been taken care of this time. So, Rick, do you want to?
Addressing proposal. Well, just know that it depends on all different disciplines. NSF is not the only way, it's a great way to do it, but the quality of reviews generally has gone down because the proposal low was 40,000, 10,000 were funded, and when I was there, and now it's up to close to 50,000 proposals submitted, and the funding rate's going lower. So the pressure on reviewers is really tremendous. So you're going to get some zinger reviewers that don't even remember where University of Texas, blah, blah, blah. They won't even know that it's North Texas. And so what can you do about it? You can ignore what you know you can ignore safely. And know that there are certain personality types on review panels. In other cases, not necessarily NSF. I like to characterize it as there's the skeptics who say everything's bad. Give them your proposal next time to review off the table. They're the cheerleaders, think everything's good. There are sort of those who have a real balanced view and give you great advice. Focus on those reviewers that you can tell who they are and what they say. And take those seriously. Ignore safely the others, because not much you can do either way.
If you get a review back from a reviewer and it's got like 3 lines that say, you know, the methods were completely flawed and they're not giving you any advice, then go to the ones that are giving you advice. I mean, I take the review process super seriously because I was a junior faculty member who got rejected a lot, and there's nothing worse than getting rejected and there's nothing in your reviews that tell you why you're so off base. So find the ones, and you'll usually have at least one, the reviewer that's taking the time to explain to you where some of the flaws are that they saw. And it's, you still have to figure out whether to agree or not. But don't get caught up on, some of them can be very, very nasty. Just, you have to let it go. You just can't. Don't dwell on it. It's a painful process.
Yes, it is.
And if you get caught up on the review that says this is the worst proposal I've ever read in my life, I've had them, you're never going to want to take that risk again. But the other reviewers are telling you this is a good idea, it has these flaws. Try to focus on the productive reviews.
You have to really have a thick skin,
Yeah.
especially as an assistant professor, until you gain some experience and start becoming more successful. And I usually give myself, the day I get the reviews, the rejection, I give myself that day to feel bad.
Yeah.
And I do feel bad. I go home and have a glass of wine, or maybe 2 glasses or something. And I don't kick the dog or anything like this, but I do feel bad that whole day. And then the next day, I say, it's over. I'm not going to think about that rejection one more time, except to incorporate their comments as best I can, call the program officer and talk to them. Those are the things that you do proactively. You cannot feel bad about this. Give yourself a half a day, and then it's over. Don't worry about it anymore.
And in terms of calling the program officer, there's some agencies where they don't allow that, they don't encourage that at all. But for agencies like NSF that do encourage that, it is so important to make that call. But give yourself 2 weeks minimum before you contact that program officer, so that you can get your frustrations out. You can clear your head. You can go back and take a more realistic viewpoint, reading the reviews again when you're not irritated, upset, fill in the blank. Then you can sit there and go through it then, and then you can talk to the program officer with a much clearer head. And with the program officer, even if the reviews are you don't agree with them, and don't try to convince the program officer to fund you, because these days they're not going to reverse the decision. The decision has been made, it's done with, it's behind you. So the perspective you need to have is, okay, so I see these reviews, I don't quite understand this one, and you get a whole new perspective. It is so important to call the program officers when you have that opportunity. Because like Nikki and I last year, we thought this one proposal, we had no chance, and then they told us ours was almost funded.
Yeah.
So, I mean, so now we have a lot of hope for this next time when we do this again. And so, you know, and so we got a much different perspective talking to the program officer than we did actually, you know, going through the reviews. And some things don't come out in the reviews, especially if it's a panel, and the program officers will tell you what has happened often on the panel. And so a lot of other discussion and points come in that are so important to really taking care of that proposal for the next round. So never think, oh, the program officer doesn't want to talk to me, my proposal reviews were horrible. That's what they're there for. They're there to help you out, and it's so important to have those discussions. Right.
I think it's also important to know how the funding agencies make their decisions. So NIH scores or panel depends whether you're above or below the funding line. USDA is just a straight, you know, how they rank. You know, we fund down to where we run out of money, it's done. NSF bins proposals. Either the fundable, you know, highly fundable, not. You can have a great proposal in a highly fundable area, and if they run out of money, it doesn't mean your proposal's flawed. It doesn't mean there's anything you can really do that's different. For NSF, because it's a foundation, it doesn't have a secretary protecting it. It's much more vulnerable to Congress than the other agencies. So they have a whole different algorithm in terms of what they will fund. For example, they will fund things to spread the money around the country, just because it's important for them to spend money. So you would like to think it's a meritocracy. It's not. It's not purely a meritocracy, particularly within a center. So in terms of, you get into the fundable range, the program officer then has lots of leeway in terms of who they will pick in the fundable range about what to fund. And if they don't distribute the money, they're not careful about putting in various congressional districts, to be honest. That is, so just because you don't get funded and you get a hard, it doesn't mean your proposal is terribly flawed. It means, you've got to go back again, persistence pace, and you're being a fundable or bendable type of a funding system. And it's up under lots of pressure right now to change that. Congress is after them to create a pure meritocracy. I think that's wrong. We need at least one science agency that recognizes that there are good ideas that come from lots of institutions, and that they find other compelling reasons to distribute, the funding in other ways. And the program officers have lots of leeway as they write their recommendations into the director of leadership about which proposal to fund and why.
And actually, following that, and what's interesting is that even within agencies, the scaling is ranks can differ quite a bit. And so in chemistry, unless you get 5 excellence, good luck getting funded. I mean, I once had 4 excellence and very good, and it wasn't happening. In some areas that I did a professional since I was in computer science, and they had very goods and goods, and I thought, we're not getting funded, we got funded. And so it very much depends upon the program, how many proposals are going in, the division, and all of that. And so it's not just agency dependent.
Kimmy, did you have?
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up because a great deal of it is focusing on NIH and NSF. My area is actually international justice, and one of the things we've been told about in networking is that we actually probably ought to target some places like Ford Foundation and Carnegie and some of these other alternatives. Yeah, absolutely. And so, like even the Oak Foundation, there's some of these other ones. So, we talked about targeting through the research office. How might we be able, I've signed up for all the SMART stuff, I get the regular things that come out. How could we sort of focus more on a more targeted, maybe for lower level grants to build those kinds of credentials? I'm concerned here especially about our junior faculty, building some of those credentials and experience with grant writing, rather than just having to be like, I've got to go to NSF or NIH or else my life is over, right? And so what kind of strategies would you recommend in that regard for how we could do some of those targeted searches?
First thing I do is send emails to these people that already write proposals and get them funded in your area, and ask them what agencies they apply to. So then I would start searching on the web at those agencies and seeing what programs are available, what RFPs are there, and you would look. And if you would start that process and then come see us, we'll continue and help you.
So do we have a database here? We do. I know we do, but I want everybody to hear this. So tell us about the database.
Right now, the University of North Texas subscribes to PIVOT, which is formerly the Community of Science. It compiles federal, nonprofit, international grants, as well as student scholarship opportunities, a variety of different funding opportunities. And for anything international or with a global focus, my office, if you can send your areas of interest, we'll run a search for you and try and identify those opportunities that are out there. And then once we identify those grants that fits your area of interest, we're happy to help you through the grant process, review it for you, help liaise with the research office, and do as much as we can to get that funded.
And actually, I know that for some foundations, actually the research office will actually send you a development list. And so then it's more of a trying to develop a relationship and having conversations over the phone all the time, even visits depending upon the funding agency or foundation. So
Who's the person in development that you speak to about?
I don't know who it is these days. I'm not.
Yeah,
That's
a good question, because I called over there. So I'm just saying, it's not clear.
Send me an email and I'll find out who we deal with. One of the things I wanted to add specifically to that is when you start going to private foundations, you actually almost have to interface with development more than OGCA, because many of those have limited submissions. And so if other faculty have already said and gotten permission to submit, we are limited on some of them to only 1 or 2 submissions from UNT. It starts to get very complicated.
Well,
Too many
and-
knocks on the
and
door.
without, right now, without a very clear process in place in development.
And so would you say that that's more the case, because my experience way back when as a junior faculty member was that the more localized the foundation was, the more difficult it could be for those kinds of foundation grants. And I don't know if that's necessarily.
Yeah, I don't think I would,
The foundation world's changed dramatically
Right.
from a, we love you, here's money, go do God's work, to actually being more embedded, more as a partner before. But the upside is, if you look at growth of funding, the public-private foundations are growing faster than many other funding sources. Having said that, the process of being funded is much more embedded. Remember, the program officer of the foundation has to take their proposal and go present it on their behalf to their board to say, board, this is, and they put their own credibility on the line when they do that. So they become more of a partner with you, sort of like, you know, some of the DOD program directors become a partner with you, or ONR does, in a very deep way. So you send in ideas, and they actually become a co-collaborator with you and help write the proposal, so they can sell it to the board, and get the board's approval to give you funding. That means you may have to develop a relationship for 2 or 3 years to convince them to buy onto this and get their own credibility. The other thing I would say is that foundations, because of IRS and other reasons, want to give their money to other foundations. Foundation to foundation transfers, as opposed to foundation to public enterprise. That's why you have to work in development of your foundation to do that, as opposed to the research.
right, and in many cases, we dual submit. So we submit through the foundation as the funding, as the requester, but then you also have to backfill through OGCA. So you so you sort of have to go in both directions. I would say a lot of the local foundations are going to be most interested in local issues. And so if you can connect your interests to what their local interests are, then you've got a chance. But, you know, the type of stuff you're doing, you're going to go to larger.
Yeah, speaking.
Yeah.
But in the same way that a lot of foundations, they don't have RFPs, they don't have
Right.
RFPs.
No.
You're giving a presentation at a conference, they're in the audience trolling for good ideas, and they'll come tap you on the shoulder and say, we like what you're doing, consider, you know, getting, working with us on a proposal. Getting out there and being visible creates opportunities that they'll just say, boy, you're doing good work, we want to fund you.
Yeah, so I just have an observation here. I know that we have talked quite a bit. I want to, we have time for folks to ask questions.
But yes, I was gonna switch over to that right now. So, do we have any questions?
So I'd like to hear, especially junior faculty, I know that why you want to come to this session. I mean, you could be at home, or you can write your own proposal. Yeah.
Where the reviewers read the proposal maybe in 2 hours, if was a command. So what do you do to make your proposal special within a few seconds if the reviewer look at it? Do you boldface something, or?
I have a plan, but I'll have to admit, when I review panels, other people don't really follow this plan. One is to give it an appeal, that if one just thumbed through it, that it just looks good. The graphics look good, the tables look good, and it looks easy to not to read, but it looks pleasant in a way. Give it what's called thumb appeal. Another thing I do is I make the captions very, very large to the figures, so that one could go through and read the captions to all the figures and have a pretty good idea of what the whole proposal is about and the result and the preliminary results. those things. And then the other thing, as Rick mentioned, probably more than anything, is a good title and a good introduction.
When I look at a proposal, memorabilia proposal, the first thing I do before I sit down and read the whole thing, I look at the summary, I look at the first part of the introduction, I look for bullets, basically, just kind of what are the basic points, I look at the conclusions, and then I'll start going through. So, Rick, I mean, you've seen lots of proposals, so.
Well, yeah, you know it when you see it, right? So they should be able to read the first line of all your paragraphs and not have to read another word. And know fully what you're doing. The rest of it is building confidence in the first statement. And so it's a exercise in prose, but Bill's right, the abstract, you hit them with why, what are you doing and why is it important? I mean, I'm gonna solve global hunger. Well, that sounds interesting, now what? And then how are you gonna? So I think that's it. I mean, beyond that, it's really hard to, you don't use jargon, you know, make sure you're reading for your colleagues minus a couple of degrees of familiarity, so that generally it's understandable to the scientifically literate person. I think those are the sort of clarity in writing is.
And particularly if you're doing an interdisciplinary proposal, I can guarantee you there will be non-scientists on that review panel, and there is nothing more horrifying to me as a social scientist than getting to a point in a proposal where there's a 4-page formula, and it happens all the time. It would be one thing if you're submitting only to engineering, but if you are submitting to a interdisciplinary area, make sure you recognize that there are going to be social scientists also reviewing that proposal, and if they don't understand what you're trying to say, you're going to struggle. I have been the lead reviewer on proposals that I started to panic as the lead because I couldn't even summarize what the proposal was about. That proposal just, it's not viable. If I cannot summarize a proposal specifically in an interdisciplinary area, you are dead in the water no matter how innovative, how transformative your science might be. If you cannot talk to me where I can understand it, you're gone.
The simple message here, nobody will fund what they don't understand.
Right.
And one of the things I see apart is all of us that are science trained think in complex ways. My wife is a literature major, a composition major. She reads all my stuff. She's still very critical because I write very complex sentences. And she keeps saying is diagram that sentence. Like, oh, I can't do that. It's too complex. Noun verb sentences. It's see the ball, see the dog, see the ball. The dog chase the ball. Very simple, very easy to digest sentences. That's not how we do that. And that's how you have to write to catch their attention.
Yeah, I'd like to add to that, another repeat. Many of those you already heard them. There's 2 points I want to add to it. One is you try to develop a habit to think like a reviewer. So you look at the criteria and you put all these criteria first before you actually write things. So make sure you address all the criteria in language you understand. And secondly, make sure you go back to make sure you talk to Rick. And here, because you said so, contribute to read that. That's my statement. My title, my bragging point is actually right on. Seriously. I have to admit, I've said this many times, but I never said this openly. So when I come to UNT, I've been written many proposals. The UNT, those are the latest successful proposal. That is because he read it. I'm serious. He read that, he has experience. He said, what are you talking about? So what? Those 2 points, if you can get him, looks like you convinced me, what are you talking about? And he's still skeptical about it. You will get it. Okay, guess what? I got it.
So that makes sense.
He's read mine. He's read mine too.
Yeah, so I like taking advantage of that. Now the downside is that you're not going to do anything else. So I think that.
So in the interest
30 seconds, 30 seconds.
There may be a class in around 5
Okay.
o'clock, we have to get the room back
One
together.
One comment, no one is basing evaluation criteria. Read the evaluation criteria.
So let's go ahead and thank our panel, and of course, I also want to thank Dale, I want to thank Brad for his very useful comments, so thank you for that. And also, I hope I'm not being too forward by suggesting this, I'm sure that any